It's been long overdue.
Long overdue. Yes.
But now's the perfect time. So welcome back to the Atlas of Chiropractic Podcast here with Dr. Bearder and Orri from NeckCare. If you guys have been to any upper cervical event this year, you have hopefully interacted with the folks at NeckCare. I really appreciate this, Orri, because there's a lot of like technology companies and little, vendors that service our industry that kind of pick and choose which events they go to based on where their friends are. But you guys showed up and showed out at everything and sponsored events, and we really appreciate that. So you guys have come in and been huge supporters of the chiropractic profession, and I think that shows the culture of the company, but thank you for that. So you guys were at Blair, NUCA, Orthospinology, the ICA.
Yeah, Orthospinology unfortunately got canceled, but yeah, we will definitely be there.
You'll be there in April. Yep.
Yeah.
In April, and then ICA as well, and some DCCJP events as well.
That's right.
For the diplomate. So yeah, both NUCA conferences, Minnesota and Newport Beach. Not very comparable places, but still definitely enjoyed both conferences.
Yeah, so you guys have you've had a pretty good cross section of the profession and heard, met lots of different folks with different levels of like experience. And I think that's always really interesting. I'd be curious what the conversations are like amongst your team at these different events and just observing the culture of the different technique organizations and everything. But we appreciate you guys showing out.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to go into any details there, but you can definitely sense that there are differences, little quirks here and there with different groups. But honestly, it's been amazing. And I think the biggest thing for us, it's like how welcome we feel. And, people seem to appreciate us being there and helping with documenting the efficacy of upper cervical. And we've heard so many amazing stories, really, and we can see it in the data too, like that. Yeah, the upper cervical adjustments are actually making a huge difference for people all across the U.S. So even so much that now we don't have an upper cervical doc in Iceland, but we just got a lead in, a patient lead that asked us, "Hey, can you please help me find an upper cervical doc in Iceland?"
Wow.
There's one.
There is?
Well, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but I do. I'll have
Someone
to send
we went to school with?
No. It's I've told her about NeckCare because she was like, "Why is this conference in Iceland?" I was like, "Because the company's Icelandic." She's like, "What?" Yeah. So I don't remember her name off the top of my head.
Please let me know because we're not selling to Iceland.
Yeah.
We're just focused on the North American market. But that's great to know. And patients come to us all the time too, asking for. So it's pretty cool to have people asking us if we know upper cervical docs in Iceland because now we know hopefully one. Cameron, please share after the call.
Will, for sure.
Well, and the good thing about showing up at conferences too is your product is experiential, and so if docs can have a chance to go through the assessments, see it, feel it, experience it, it's just so much of a stronger connecting point to the value than if you just go do a demo, for example. So hopefully lots of folks took advantage of those opportunities and got to take it for a test drive and see for themselves. But Cameron was a super early adopter. He started talking to me about it probably 18 months ago. And we came on board in January and have been using it all year. It's awesome. And it's only gotten better consistently. And I've told tons and tons of folks, like, as good as NeckCare is now, they have no signs of slowing down, improving their customer service, their product, their technology, their reporting. Like everything's getting better all the time. So definitely get into that wave.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm proud about that too. Like every dollar we get from our customers actually goes straight back into development. So we are on this mission to create, the number one neck rehabilitation platform, in the world. So obviously that requires investment, and we're very well aware of that. And it's just been great to meet customers, hear from customers, all the feedback that I'm, less so interested in the things that are awesome. I'm more interested in the things that we can improve on. So how can we just, help as many doctors treat their patients in a better way? We're here for that.
It's awesome to hear that as a customer, frankly, because it's one of those things where obviously there's a ton of value for our clinics, but to think that the dues and the, like the money that you invest in a product like this is going back in to make the product better and serve your patients better instead of, you know, decorate the office or send you on trips around the world with your family, things like that. Like obviously all those things are important too, but you guys are very mindful to continue to improve. And I think that's awesome to hear as a customer as well. And even though it's fairly new to our market, you guys are not new. I mean, this research and this development has been ongoing for a good amount of time. So I think it'd be a good idea to just give folks a little bit of the timeline with the development of this program, and you've got the software portion of it and you've got the hardware portion of it. So it'd be good to just kind of walk through that history and development just to give folks an idea of how long this has actually been in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually been in development for more than 20 years. So that's, people are surprised about that. That's apparently how long it also takes to get a medical device to market, which is, crazy in some ways, but, good in others. It means that we have actually been able to research it. We've been able to validate it, do reliability studies and validity. Obviously, there's a lot of regulatory components that come into being listed with the FDA.
Right.
And there's a lot of requirements. Fortunately, in some ways, yeah, our founder was a physical therapist, PhD, and his life's work is the butterfly test. So now we're able to quantify function of the neck. We have the imaging and x-rays for structure, but up until this point, there hasn't been a functional test.
Yeah.
And I had neck coordination, and I heard that you were also talking to Dr. Harrison from North Carolina on your last podcast, and we're talking about the cervical spine as a sensory organ, which it is in fact. So that's what we also are preaching and trying to educate the market as well about the importance of the cervical spine in so many different aspects. So that's where the all that research and work from Dr. Christensen comes in. To that, invented the butterfly test as an assessment and as a treatment as well. But yeah, we'll get into that maybe later on this chat.
Yeah, so 20 years of research and development to get to the market with what you see now. And I think a lot of folks may underestimate just the amount of time and energy and effort and money required to create something good, and to have it last and be marketable and have all those boxes checked, with the regulatory processes, like you said, in upper cervical chiropractic. Like, at what point did you become integrated into this community? Because I know you weren't there 20 years ago, at the impetus of NeckCare. So you came along at some point, and then you have done tons of networking into our industry. So maybe describe your role in getting involved with NeckCare, and then how you came to the upper cervical world.
Yeah, it's a great question. I got introduced to NeckCare about 3 years ago, a bit more, where I actually joined the board. So more from a commercial perspective, helping with business models and like how to actually go to market. Because the founders have been very clinical, and clinical and commercial are not the same thing.
True that. Our listeners know all too well.
Yes. So, that's where I fit into the puzzle. And then 2 years ago, I joined as a CEO to lead the commercialization effort. So, that's the first thing I did was fly out to the US and actually cold call. I picked up the phone and I looked for some prospects that I thought were interested. It turns out that our first customer was actually an upper cervical doc in Minnesota. And then since then, obviously, we want to learn, okay, what is your practice about, and why do you think NeckCare helps? So we're defining that value proposition, that product market fit in different pockets. Upper cervical turned out to be one of them. We didn't know that going into it, but we have definitely found that it's an amazing fit for our product and in a place where we can really, truly make a difference. So that's the upper cervical story. And then obviously, yes, we are also serving the physical therapy community and also medical doctors and pain management interventions, pre and post interventions, neurology, physical medicine, rehabilitation. We are playing across the rehabilitation space, which we really find rewarding to, have common understanding, common data between those professions.
Yeah. That's what I think is the clinician on the clinician side, I think that's what's really interesting and promising, is being able to compare outcomes across different disciplines and understand who's doing what and how. Just having a common denominator, like all of our objective assessments are so niche and like unique to our practice style that they don't translate well into other spaces, right? These things don't mean anything to anyone else. But at least with this now, we have a common language and a common set of objectives and measurables that we can relate on. And I think that's huge. And it couldn't have been a chiropractic company to do that because we're just a little bit too like focused on our own models and our own objectives. But I appreciate that. And I'm excited to see kind of where that goes as the data pours in, because you guys have auto injury clinics, you've got the PMR folks, PTs, the chiros, the rehab chiros, the upper cervical chiros. It's going to be really interesting. And you guys are going to be collecting more data on neck function than anybody anywhere has ever.
You know,
absolutely.
I think there's a really interesting point, and John and I have talked about this, Orri, for years, and it's kind of, I'll at least speak for myself, it's one of the issues that I believe has plagued chiropractic and upper cervical in particular, is all the technology that we use is niche chiropractic, or the majority of technology. So you have things like, what's called a thermal scanner, a Titron. Like there's all of these small things that are only used by a very few amount of people. And I've always wanted to use other people's technology, other healthcare areas technologies to understand what we're doing. Because if we can prove what we're doing using their tech, right, we've won. We know we get our changes with our tech. That's great. We've been doing it for however many hundreds of years. I think it's like 1,000 or something. But like it's old stuff. So now we have something that everyone can use, and we can put our cards on the table, and we can say, this is what we've done. What have you done? And it's no longer like, oh, well, the PT said this or the chiro. It's like, nope, here's the data. The data isn't going to lie. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity. I'm really excited for the future. And we kind of have to like really lay it all out there, in that if we see that another group is doing something and they're getting superior outcomes, I want to know what that is. Like, one, that kind of sucks, if it's not us, but like, hey, we got to learn. The more we can learn, the better the patient is going to get. And that's kind of the whole point of this, right? We want to help patients as much as possible. So just like John said, the data in the future, like being able to data mine 5-10 years of PT data, chiro data, it's actually mind-blowing what could be done. It's just creativity and then hiring people to mine it and then create the statistics from it. It's very exciting.
Absolutely.
Well, and even with the technological advancements, like to your point, Cameron, a lot of our technological advancements are just like a manufactured version of something older.
And that's okay.
Right? It's like we have thermocouple instruments, so we get the infrared instrument, but it's not necessarily something new. It's just how do we improve on what we've always had? And so new things, just like with CBCT, with the advent of like advanced imaging, and when this new imaging modality comes in, it goes, oh my God, we see all this other thing. We see all this extra stuff now. We have all these extra bits of information. What do we do with that? That can drive innovation. And the same with this types of things. It's like, as we're looking at, okay, we've always looked at range of motion, but we haven't been able to measure range of motion the way that we are now. And so we're going, oh, okay, like, what do we do with this information? How can that drive innovation in our practices? And how does that make us think differently about how we utilize our interventions? And Cameron's showing off his Keystone shirt. Innovation in upper cervical spine care.
You got to do it.
Yeah. But you got to have the compelling data to drive innovation. Our particular, or you may have picked up on this, our particular little like sandbox that we play in upper cervical chiropractic is very, I guess in their ethos, you could say, are very traditional and sort of purist, and are very slow to adopt change, because we feel very confident in our foundational concepts, principles, and practices. And so the data has to be compelling enough to drive innovation in our world. It's different than, like you said, in the commercial space. It's like we want to innovate yesterday. In an upper cervical chiropractic, traditionally we've kind of been very slow to adopt change. But I think this is an interesting precipice, that we're kind of on in a few different ways. But let's talk. Go ahead.
No, and I think as well, like in speaking with, obviously different professions within the rehabilitation space, neck rehabilitation space in particularly. It's interesting. I feel like the chiropractors are also navigating or gravitating more towards doing some rehab, not just sticking with the adjustments. So adjustments obviously being a cornerstone in their rehabilitation, but, doing some more exercises, wanting to keep the patient under their care for more elements and aspects of that journey. So, and the same for the PTs, they also want to keep their patients under their care and exploring with, okay, is there more manual therapy that we could be doing? So it's interesting how I think these two worlds that have been very separated historically feel like are, could be converging in some way. At least I hope so as well. That, we can't just look at one upper cervical adjustment and say, okay, that's going to fix everything. I know we're on an upper cervical podcast, but still.
Well, they know. We've seen it.
Yeah,
and the good thing about that is, again, with the data, you don't have to take someone's word for it to say, okay, this particular intervention makes sense in this case, right? And so let's talk about the technology so folks that aren't familiar, who've been living under a rock, know what exactly NeckCare draws out. So there's three main assessments. So you got cervical range of motion, joint position error, and the butterfly test that Orri mentioned. With each of those, maybe Cameron, if you want to speak to the science of those, or at least briefly highlight like why those assessments are important in our space, and then we'll talk about what the reporting and the actual data looks like.
Well, range of motion obviously is really important, right? And not many people do it. Orri and I have had this conversation ad nauseum. It's like we still have people using like the goniometer and the you got this going on, and then you've got the digital one that'll kind of, and it's clunky. And when it's clunky, there's variables, and when there's variables, you don't get accurate data, and then you might not have an accurate clinical depiction. So to me, it's like range of motion seems to be the simplest, but honestly, I think it's probably the most solid gold. We can hang our hat on range of motion, and then additionally, because NeckCare has updated, which John mentioned at the beginning of this, we've been involved with NeckCare for a short amount of time, but it has evolved positively in such a short amount of time. I've never seen that happen with a company that I've been aware of. It's truly amazing. But so we have the software update, and now with range of motion, you have accessory movement. This is mind blowing. You could never see this stuff outside of a laboratory. In terms of now, if they're doing left rotation, let's say they have 70 degrees of left rotation, it's like, okay, that's good. But then if you go and look at the accessory movement, you see that they laterally flexed to the right by 15 degrees. That is abnormal. So even though...
And not only that, you can see at what point in that rotation they initiated that lateral. You can say at 35 degrees of left rotation, you laterally flex 13 degrees.
Here's where this... Truly, there's not enough Bitcoin that is ever going to be mined to be this valuable for this little nugget that's about to be dropped right here. Make this a magic clip because if you, as a clinician, if you understand what activates and what is being used, what is being not used within the range of motion from 0 to 70 degrees, if you know that between 0 and 20, the upper cervical spine is likely going to be the driver, and you know that they start right out of the gate and they start compensating, you know that that's an upper cervical issue. But if they start compensating later in the movement, it's probably more muscular stability and or it's something lower cervical. That right there is priceless. We've never had that data before. It gives me fucking goosebumps. I'm just like, oh my God.
Well, data demystifies situations that are otherwise confusing. Yes. And there's been lots of, in clinical care, there is always the element of you're dealing with humans where the variables aren't controlled. So you want to stack the deck in your favor to have the best possible data to work with because of all those additional variables. So in your hallmark assessments and the things that are most important for the way you're going to intervene, you definitely don't want to have crappy data. And it's like, Orri, we'd probably talked about this, and other folks may have too. It's like, how has this not been a thing? You're probably looking around the market going like, where has this been? Because it seems so obvious, but there's nothing there previously. It's kind of crazy.
And I'll tell you, when I started going out to customers and obviously to learning how do you do this today from a range of motion perspective? I'm still shocked that most people are eyeballing it. Let's just say it how it is. And then, some people use the conies. Then you have the dual inclinometry that no one seems to be able to figure out how to hold, especially on the rotation. So it's so, what do we say? It's not the most reliable or repeatable from clinician to clinician and all that. So yes, I have been shocked. Like, how has no one figured this out? But again, knowing that it takes 20 years to actually go through the process and be pretty darn stubborn along that way. So that's why I'm incredibly thankful for the work that was conducted before I joined, because I would have never been able to get to that point. But rather obviously take a product to market is what I love to do.
Well, I feel bad for any company that's on like year 12 to 15 in this space, because by the time they get out, you guys are going to have dominated the market. So range of motion. So we've got that accurate assessment. And just so folks know, the way that this data is collected, there's a pretty sleek, very minimal headset that patient's wearing. It's got a Bluetooth accelerometer. So as the patient is you're not dealing with any of that clunky to use Cameron's word technology. They just literally put the headset on and they move in their comfort and without encumbering them with these like clunky devices. So it's all very like straightforward as far as user friendly. You just strap the little device on, and as they perform their neck movements, all this data is being collected, moment by moment. It's cool too, because they can go at whatever pace they want. You can do as many trials as you want, 1 to 5 reps of this kind of thing, and see where your average is and are they improving. I like to see, like, do they get better with reps? Do they get worse with reps? How do we think about these things?
And I think
range
as well,
of motion,
like from an objective perspective, we hear that a lot, especially from people that work with, MBA, like car accident clinics, or like have those cases from time to time. There are certain guidelines that AMA has. Like, you have to do 3 repetitions in each direction, in each movement. And so, maybe you only do 1 or 2 as your standard assessment. But if you get an MBA patient or PI case, well, okay, I'm just going to, do 3. And then I have the documentation ready to send to that attorney or that insurance company right there from a data perspective. So that's been another feedback that we heard that has been truly helping those clinics seeing those types of patients.
What other, I don't know of another company that's going out of their way to listen to feedback and then updating their entire system to then facilitate the clinician having an easier time providing the necessary documentation so that they can get reimbursed, right? Like, what other company is doing that? Most other companies just like, oh, you just buy the product and like, you got to figure it out yourself. That's crazy. That's freaking crazy.
But I'd still like actually ask those companies, why wouldn't you? Like, it's the best thing you can do for your business. And, we have 3 strategic pillars, and, in the center, we have innovating customer-centric products. So, if how am I going to know better about the product than the customers? Like, it's essentially always the customers that are going to tell you. The only thing we need to be aware of is that we can't listen to every feedback if we hear it once. So it's more like, okay, what are the trends that we're seeing? Like, okay, hey, this idea was just the best in the world. Like, every idea from Cameron just goes straight into the platform. No, I'm kidding. But
please don't stroke his ego.
No, but no, it's obviously listening and filtering out. Like, okay, no, this is never going to work, or it's not enough bang for a buck. So we go through this list as well. Like, okay, is there true value in this? How many people are requesting this? And actually, like, it's super basic things that have been kind of, just PDFs. The PDF has to be good, super unsexy. And, full transparency, the development team hates PDFs.
But like, why are we doing this?
It's not flashy. It's not any of that, but it's what the customer wants. So that's what we listen to. And then again, I think, as we move forward, from a year from now, we have like an overall goal where we want to get to with product development, but then we have to have room for that feedback and iteration, and we have a very agile process that we can actually deploy pretty quickly for a medical device company. like those updated and improved functionalities.
Well, and for just to pat your development team on the back, the reason why, maybe some of those like what feel like antiquated things are so valuable is because all the other technology in chiropractic is so far behind that these are unfortunately the things that we need to create integration among the things that we use. And it's funny because even when you've solicited feedback, I found it hard because there's nothing to compare it to. It's like,
That's
I mean, when you're kind of in a different category, it's like I kind of love what I have. I don't know, like I don't have too many gripes with it. And it's sometimes hard to provide good objective feedback when your product stands alone.
When you don't want to sound
kind of a thing
nitpicking either. Like I don't, or you've asked for feedback along the way. And like, just like John said, it's kind of nitpicking. It's like, man, this is really good already. And like, we have nothing to compare it to. So I don't want to sound like an a-hole, be like, well, this color could be a little different, or like, maybe it has a hue to it, or maybe this. It's like, it's when you stand that far ahead of everything, you only have yourself to compare to, which is kind of a good thing, but also maybe not a good thing. I think that's a whole completely different conversation, but
well, it also takes time for clinicians to get enough reps, like depending on how you do your treatment and when you would perform these exam procedures, pre and post adjustment or at progress exams, different intervals. It'll take you a few months to even understand what the pain points are or what things you would improve. So we kind of got off on a sidebar there, which is fine.
Range of motion.
So we talked about the range of motion, which is huge, right? Like here's the thing, like if you are working on the spine and not measuring range of motion, you're already messing up. Like you've got to do that. So for that alone, NeckCare is worth it, right? So joint position error is another of the exams. And typically, I don't know what order you do things in, Cameron, but I'll do range of motion, joint position error, and then butterfly last. So we'll kind of explain them in sequence that way. So joint position error.
So I actually like the word joint position or the phrase sense. Joint position sense better than error. But, so joint position sense or joint position error is something that's been in the research for 20 years, 25 years, Orri, something like that. I think it was 1991. So actually more than that. 30 something.
More than.
And it was discovered, or it was looked at, and then it's just kind of gone bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you have Dr. Julia, who's going to like the authority on this, who's going to be speaking at the conference. Most of the research has, from what I've seen, been done by her, but it's the thought that you have input from proprioceptors, okay? So muscle spindles and proprioceptors in the cervical spine, and that gives feedback. So we'll say symmetrical feedback about where the neck is in space. And when you turn your head left or right or up and down, theoretically, as things stretch, they should go back to a homeostatic neutral. But with altered joint position sense, with some sort of neck injury, what the research has found, and now what we see every day in practice with NeckCare, is that people's necks are a little jacked up. They don't go back to a homeostatic neutral, right? Now, no one's perfect, of course, but NeckCare has shown that it should be within a certain range, and so we use that range. And when I first got this, I had no idea. I'm like, this looks cool, but I have no idea what it means. And Orri and I have talked about this, and I think NeckCare is going to be doing a great job in the future about what they're building to help explain this so that their clients can really understand. But it isn't necessarily just the joint. If you actually go and look at the research, it's actually more of the muscle spindle, and the joint plays a smaller part. And that hurt a little bit at first, because I'm like, chiropractor, like, man, the cervical joints, like this is what we do, especially from a Blair perspective. But when you take a step back and you say, wait a minute, it's not that we're leaving the joint out of the equation. It's all of it. It's the entire system. And you have a better appreciation for the muscle spindle. And so I have a deeper understanding. And now I think, well, hey, wait a minute, physical rehab, physio might be a really good thing to do if my intervention doesn't do what we want it to, and the patient doesn't get the subjective improvement. So at first it was like, ooh, maybe this isn't good because it hurts my ego. But then as I let it down, like, holy crap, this is amazing, because this is data that we haven't seen before, at least not been able to quantify efficiently with the reports. So because it's digital, you save minutes, as opposed to patients wearing a freaking laser, right? And they close their eyes and you have to mark it with a pen on a freaking piece of paper, and you're asking the patient to hold still.
It just doesn't feel scientific, right? You're trying to imply some like important physiology to this really doopy test, and you just feel like, man, it doesn't seem very scientific. So just to give folks an idea of how the test is performed in case you're unfamiliar. So again, patients wearing the headset, and what we have them do is execute a movement and attempt to relocate the cervical spine back to the same position they started in. And so in a normal scenario, you should be there's a 4-degree target there. And I always tell folks, because it's visually represented as a target, it's like shooting targets or playing darts. Like you want to hit the bullseye and you want to group them real tight together. And so they kind of understand that, like, okay, if I'm not accurate in my ability to relocate my head to that position, like what is going on? This test is performed with the eyes closed, right? So they're not visually orienting. They're relying heavily on and exclusively on, not exclusively, but almost exclusively on those neurophysiological processes related to the joints and muscles of the neck, right? So it is a nice correlate to that range of motion, because we can say, all right, we see what you can do with your movement. Let's see how well your neck independently is performing those movements or lack thereof. And it's, again, like you can track these things over time. So if you see progress with them, you know that your intervention directly impacted that physiology. If you don't see, then you can choose another intervention so as to improve that test. But for even with patients, like we talked about this with Harrison, it gives you at least a way to start to categorize, like, where's this problem coming from and which things do we need to do to improve on their outcome? Because symptoms are all over the place, right? Everybody feels dizzy. Everybody has a headache. Everybody's got neck pain. But do they all need to be treated the same way? Absolutely not. And so this will start to give you those ways to pick and choose how you may start, sequence, or perform your interventions.
You know, something that I'm
absolutely, and I can't tell you how many patient studies or patient cases or success stories we've heard, like about like, you know, I had this dizziness patient, and they have been into vestibular therapy or they've been to vision therapy, and you know, tried everything under the sun, but still feeling dizzy. Okay, that's a red flag. Let's check your neck. You know, doing the, you know, both the joint position test and the butterfly. Wow. If you're not able to perform this, that's a strong indicator that, well, your symptoms might actually be originating from your neck. Let's work on your neck. And patient goes, what? I'm dizzy. I don't feel neck pain. But obviously you know this better than I do. But for the patient to realize, okay, well, I don't know where my head is at in space. When I close my eyes, I have no idea, you know, how to come back to neutral. And you can show them that on an objective report. And that's what we heard from a patient education perspective. And, you know, Dr. Chad Biller is up in New Jersey, told me, you know, he's been, you know, doing this religiously. And he's seen incredible results, you know, documenting pre and post, just the joint position error test, pre and post one upper cervical adjustment, incredible difference. So that obviously is pretty amazing.
It is good. It's really good. And something that I want to highlight as well, these tests build on each other. So they support each other. And one of the things that I think is going to be great about 2025 with the upcoming NeckCare Academy is you're going to be able to understand the intricacies. Like, if you want to get into the weeds, you can get into the weeds. So like, for example, with range of motion, if you understand range of motion and you see that they have a deficiency, let's say in left cervical rotation, and then with joint position error, right? They also have a left joint position error going back to center. You could potentially say, okay, we have a 2 out of 2 here, right? Now I need to go and look at the right side of the neck. They're having pain on the right side of the neck, or they feel something, you know, irritation on the right side. They have a restriction going to the left. They have a joint position error going to the left, which theoretically would be an issue on the right. So like, putting the dots together only enhances your confidence about, I really think this is going on right here like this. So,
and so just to give folks an idea, this test is performed in flexion and extension and in right and left rotation, right? So we're checking different planes and we're checking different ranges with that. And it's kind of interesting, like you said, Cameron, to like go right off of the range of motion and try to get an idea of like, okay, based on this person's symptoms and what I just saw with their movement, here's what I think I might see. And then sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then it's, you know, then you move on to the butterfly test and bring that sensory integration piece into it. But yeah, the joint position error thing is one that, like, you know, I tell patients, this is not something you're doing a ton of day to day, which is like moving your head and neck around in the dark and like relying on that sense. But it does give us a window into some physiology by eliminating that visual variable. And I tell them it's like trying to find the light switch in the dark. You're at the Airbnb and it's like unfamiliar territory. You're feeling around in the dark and you have no frame of reference for that. When the neck is injured, that happens. Sometimes people lose that frame of reference. And if you want to talk about cortical smudging and all that kind of a thing, it's like,
we're not going to talk about cortical smudging, but although I think we should, but anyways, it's, yes, I make the joke with patients all the time. You don't live your life with your eyes closed. We know that, but how many times a day do you blink, right? That's compelling. That's thought provoking. But the beautiful thing about the brain, and this is a little bit technical, but the beautiful thing about the brain is it is always going to correct the error. Okay? So there's structures that are involved in error correction, namely the cerebellum. When you take so if you have joint position sense, which is neck and eyes, if you take the eyes out of the equation, you take a potential error correction out of the equation. Your brain will use your eyes to error correct. So now, if you take that out, you're getting a better understanding of a more exclusive physiology and or a compensation pattern. And the crazy thing is, and Dr. Kerr really tuned me into this, it's not like that compensation pattern goes away when their eyes are open again. It's still going on in the background. It's just even further compensated because the eyes are another level of compensation. Like, it is mind-blowing.
It's actually it's actually incredible to think about all of what goes on with this stuff.
And so you can see this. You can see this potentially with the joint position sense test.
And real world example, I had a new patient last night. We're doing these tests, and she keeps getting these spasms on the right side of her neck, and she's got pain and headaches and the whole thing. So we're going through these tests, and she doesn't have very much left cervical rotation. She doesn't have much right lateral flexion. Her joint position error, she's overshooting on the way back from everything. So we're just kind of having a conversation about like when you're feeling these symptoms and what's going on day to day. And she mentions work. What do you do for work? Well, I'm a desk jockey, right? And I said, do you happen to have 2 monitors? Yeah. Which one's primary and which one do you turn to look at? Well, usually the one sitting in front of me is primary. The one to the right is the one that I'm looking at. So we talked about how many hundreds or thousands of times a day do you think you do this right cervical rotation twitch? And do you see how irritating that could be to your system? Like at rest and as a baseline, just going through these motions, you see how that's hard for your body to do. Like, let's talk about ways that we may reconcile this situation so that you can give this physiology a rest and quit reinforcing that compensation, to Cameron's point. Because I told her I might have the best adjustment, this side of the Mississippi, but like if you keep doing that all day, we are going to be fighting an uphill battle. So there's multiple layers of insights to this stuff. And when you really start to like observe the data and observe the trends with patients, it does, like, it's 3 simple tests, but it's not really like it's a window into quite a bit of information.
This is why so we talked about this is important. Hopefully people are now understanding why I can only speak for myself. I've been so on fire for this company and this technology, like everything about it. We haven't had this before. Like it's like it's like you got Bitcoin at $100. I know I've said it twice now, but like that's the level of opportunity here. Truly, there's nothing out there like this. So when you take a step back, you use this for 6 months, and then you go on a little bit of a bender. You maybe take some hallucinogens, and you have this crazy NeckCare journey. Not sponsored by NeckCare, but it's like you come out the other end thinking, oh my God. This is endless. The opportunity is endless. And you could, if you really, really, really sit down, you can enhance your patient's care and recovery to a level that potentially you didn't even think was possible. Like that's the capability here. But yes, next test.
Well, especially if you are marketing yourself, if you're positioning yourself in your market as a neck expert.
Yes.
It's like this lady last night, the light bulb goes off. We're having this conversation. It's like, Jesus Christ, this guy knows what he's talking about, right? Because the data is just showing me where to go with the conversation.
That's good.
But this is a funny just comment, and Orri may remember, but we had talked about in our initial maybe demo. It's like, being friends with Cameron over the last 8 years, it's like he has brought so many amazing new things, up. It's like, this is the next amazing. And so I usually give it 3 to 6 months to just kind of see, like, is he going to keep talking about this, or is this going to like fall by the wayside when the next really interesting, amazing thing comes up? And NeckCare never went away, right? And it's only intensified. So by the time we talked, it was like, all right, he's been on this long enough that there's definitely, it's got some teeth. And then seeing for myself, definitely the real deal. So we
Still tripping.
Oh, dude,
still tripping. Yeah.
That ayahuasca. I'm on it, man.
in Iceland. What are we talking about now?
Oh my God. Fine motor.
Okay,
Fine
so we
motor.
talked about, range of motion, joint position there, and then the butterfly test. Or we talked about this kind of as the impetus to this whole thing, which is this research-based assessment that ended up being very impactful for diagnosis and treatment. So Cameron, explain what the butterfly test is, and then we will get into the weeds again.
I have to say this one is the sexiest and most exciting, like from like an opportunity standpoint. And I'll be very transparent. It's also one of the most confusing ones because it is a movement integration test. I think it will hold the most value, but I personally am still trying to understand, like, man, what's going into this? And so I'm actually going to be speaking at the NeckCare conference on the butterfly test and what I've been doing to try and understand what is going on here. But so it's a sensory motor test. You have the headset on and you are tracking an object with your head, neck, and eyes. So the object is moving on the screen. It's a little dot, and then there's a cross or a plus, and you follow it. You follow the dot with the plus. And it's actually really difficult, but it involves your neck, it involves your eyes, and it does involve your vestibular system, okay? And at first glance, you'd think, oh, this is definitely neck, like this is all neck, but it's not. And that's where it gets really complicated, but it also gets really exciting. And so, for example, I spent, we talk about tech. I went out and bought an expensive pair of glasses that patients wear while they do the butterfly test, and it looks at the eyes as this test is being performed. Because if you close the eyes for a test and joint position sense, and then you open them again for a movement test, that's a variable. And I think that's a really important variable. So, of course, me being the mad scientist, I'm just like, I'm just going to do this. And I'm still trying to figure it out because as far as I know, we don't have any normative data, but the butterfly test is in 3 different ways. There's an easy, medium, and hard. And the easy one is all 4 quadrants, but it moves a little bit slower. And the angles of movement are a little bit more sweeping. It's a bit more gentle. And then as you put the pedal down, it becomes fast, slow, sharp, quick, pivot, right? What we do on a daily basis. And what you can see is that people have a real hard time tracking the object. They'll either deviate left and right, so amplitude deviation, or they will fall behind, or they'll be overshooting it, right? And so you have all of this data, and you have to take a step back and say, Jesus, how do we know what's what? And as I've been using this for a while now, I've gotten a better grip of, okay, look at the quadrants, right? So look at all 4 quadrants, upper, lower, right, left. Do they have a issue in the upper left quadrant with all 3 tests? Okay, bookmark that, right? Are they good with movement, but when they slow it down, they can't maintain the slow speed? That's intrinsic musculature. That's stabilization. That's probably really small things that you can't see on an X-ray, or maybe you can't see on an MRI, right? This is functional data, but now we have the evidence to show it. So like the opportunity truly is all the way out at Pluto. Like it's out of this galaxy. Yeah. But I still think there's a huge amount of research that still needs to go in. The fact that one person did this for 20 years, I understand it. I could spend 20 years just doing this as well. It's crazy.
And I think for like, obviously, you're going to, the extremes of like, okay, I want to understand this and that this tiny thing about this part of the path, I want to understand it. For, I think most people, at least from our customer perspective, it's been great. At least that's the feedback that we've received, is that now I have a functional test, I have the structural test, and then the functional test. Are they able to move through that butterfly smoothly or not? If they're all over the place, their eye-head-neck coordination most likely is out of sync. So I think that are some of the terms that I think the patients understand probably better than what Cam just said.
I get it.
But I think from that perspective, super helpful to show that, okay, here's where you were when you came in. You were all over the map. You weren't able to follow that dot the slightest. Hey, 4 weeks into treatment, this is how where you're at. And then 8 weeks into treatment, hey, you're actually within healthy and normative data. So to be able to document that functional improvement has proven to be very valuable.
Absolutely.
Well, and
in conjunction with the structural.
For myself, because before I do an exam, I'll tell folks, like, with issues with the neck, we've got to consider two things. Is it positional or structural, or is it muscle or movement based, or what combination of the two? And so we're going to test both of those things, right? Like, we're going to do our movement and our functional assessments first, go through this. Then at the end, we go, okay, we picked up on some issues. All right, so let's see positionally, what is the alignment and the character of the spine? Which thing do we need to change here? Back to the point about interventions, like, how do we need to, like, integrate some different treatment perspectives to make sure that you find the best possible result? And here's the things you did well, here's the things you don't do well. I described this, the butterfly test, as neck dexterity. Just to give the example of my 6-year-old son, he's learning to write, right? So he's tracing the letters, and because he doesn't have good control, he doesn't have a lot of experience, and his brain isn't used to performing that, he's tense when he does it. The letters are choppy, right? But with time and effort and practice, it will become more smooth. And when your neck is injured, sometimes you lose some of that dexterity. You have a hard time. Those movements become choppy and uncomfortable. And so we're going to see how well you do with that. And we're going to do the simple, like, tracing, and we're going to go cursive, right? Like, we're going to try a lot of different ways to see which things you're good at and which things you're not. And as a correlate to some of those other tests, like you said, Cameron, it builds on it. And we go, okay, I'm not doing oculomotor rehab. I'm not doing vestibular rehab. Like, I'm an upper cervical chiro. That's my deal. So I want to see, like, okay, am I really concerned that there is a potentially significant, impact of those other systems on my ability to get results with upper cervical? This test, in my opinion, offers really good insights into that. You combine that with the symptoms, and you combine that with, a few other things that you do in your office. Like, you can have a strong indicator of if a referral's in order, if co-management's in order, if those other strategies, like you were talking about, Orri, in the physical rehab space, are going to be important for this patient. And then you can kind of set that as a benchmark and go, you know what, for 4 weeks here, let's get you adjusted and work on some of this stuff. Come back and retest. If we're making progress, great, we're doing everything we need to do. If we're not, that's a great time to tap someone in. But again, we're going to have a reason for that, right? We're not going to just do it because you're not feeling better. We don't know what else to do. Yeah. It's like, we have an assessment that suggests the physiology needs to be attended to, and we have not improved there. Maybe we've improved in these other domains, but this one stands alone. Okay, let's implement a strategy for that too. So again,
that's actually a great point there that we've heard too, as from a feedback perspective. It's actually enhanced clinicians' confidence, which is great to hear. And just quotes we've heard is like, I have had like a gut feeling that what I'm doing is working, but maybe just a bit slower than I anticipated. And the patient says they don't feel any different, but we do the NeckCare test, and then we see, hey, you're actually making progress. We are on the right track. Let's continue for another 2 weeks. And then, wow, the patient starts feeling better because the objective data was suggesting
Yep. And the reporting's great too, because at the end of this test, right, they go through all these tests, and then you just view the report. It's not something that has to process or you have to come back to later. It's instantly available with all that data we've been talking about. And it's all very visually compelling. Like, the reporting is nice because it's got the colors, it's got the simple images and graphics. Like, it's not overwhelming for folks to, at a glance, go back and say, like, yeah, okay, I see here where the issues are. And we just quickly highlight those things. And just, Orri, for your information, traditionally in chiropractic, it's like you do all your tests and then you bring them back the next day and you talk them into their treatment plan using the tests. We don't have to do that now, because we can just immediately show them, like, okay, we just explained why this is important. We just explained how it could be related to your symptoms. Here's where you are, right? It takes some of that, like, I don't understand what this guy's talking about, out of it. And it just goes like, oh, we're just observing your performance or lack thereof. And then we will guide your treatment accordingly. So I love the reporting part of it, and the PDFs and all that stuff too, but it's all readily available on the screen. And folks get it, right? And they can see it visually, they can anchor to it. They just had an experience of performing the tests. So I think all of that is very compelling for patients. And I know you guys have made a lot of efforts to make sure that that's something that the clinicians can use properly. Like, all the stuff Cameron was talking about, it's like, man, patients are so overwhelmed by a lot of that information, but the evidence is there, right? You pull up the report and you go, here you are, here's what we need to improve on. So the reporting's awesome too. And so for folks that are doing a day 1, day 2 type of thing, you could take some time and look at that data later and go, okay, let me just, like, try to wrap my head around what all of this means and what needs to change. And then you can sit down your patient in your next visit and succinctly explain positionally, structurally, functionally, muscularly, with the sensory experience of using your neck every day. It gives you a really nice, I think, a really nice blend of things to emphasize as far as, like you said, Orri, the neck is super important. And it's not just the alignment. It's not just the muscles. It's all of it. It's how your brain uses your neck. It's how your body relies on the use of your neck to position your head in space. And it's all really fascinating. And people, I don't know, like when you're passionate about something and you're curious about it, like it's a little bit contagious, right? So when you get excited talking about this stuff with folks, they really appreciate the fact that, number one, you've taken the time to collect the data. You are interpreting the data for them, right? You're really individualizing your care, hopefully, based on the data you've collected. And that's really powerful. I think that's something that's been missing in this space because, like Cameron's talked about, it's like the neck is kind of like, we all agree that it's important, but even the PT stuff, I've looked at the PT literature. It's like very boring. It's like the same generic exercises and stretches. It's like, man, when does
you get the towel,
Yeah, and we do that kind of stuff,
snags,
and it's like, exactly. It's like how now can we, build this out with a little bit more specificity, right?
Yeah,
and I think we will only find out more as time goes on.
Absolutely.
But I don't want to skip over, because we could go on, and I appreciate you guys being generous with your time. But let's talk about, Cameron talked about the conference coming up in Iceland, Advancing Neck Rehabilitation. Let's just, first of all, for a technology company doing all this stuff, why did you think that it was important to host a conference on top of everything else you're doing? And then talk to us about who's going to be there and what the topics of discussion are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't decide to host the conference because the marketing team wasn't busy. So they have cursed me more than once for the work that goes into this. But obviously, it's a huge lift to organize a global conference in Iceland. But I think what the vision we have is advancing our mission. Our mission statement is advancing neck rehabilitation through technology and education. And we appreciate that technology on its own is not going to do that. Yes, everyone is doing range of motion, but as we've talked about, joint position sense is super important, but people just don't know it yet. Whether that's a PT, MD, or a chiropractor, doesn't matter. It's actually kind of the same. The same for the sensory motor control or sensory motor integration. Yeah, people don't necessarily know what to do with that information. So that's what we do really want to become, is that thought leader in neck rehabilitation. And a part of that is the education component, where we bring different professions together, whether that's an MD or a PT, a chiropractor, bring those great minds together. And what better place than in Iceland to hopefully experience some awesome nature and hot springs. But obviously the point being that, we come together, we share our different views. And if only, you will take something away from that talk from Dr. John Letty on how he views concussion treatment, or how he views the connection between the neck and concussion success rehab. If you can actually gather some information from him around that, if you get something from Dr. Julia Treleaven, a physical therapist who's been looking at joint position sense for the last 20, 30 years, that's what we want. And the same the other way. If you guys or other chiropractors that will be speaking at that conference can actually relay information to Twin Cities Orthopedics, which a ginormous enterprise in Minnesota, a physical therapy clinic with orthopedic surgeons and everything. If they can learn something from your approach from a chiropractic perspective, or open their eyes to, I might need to refer more to chiropractors, or we might want to bring chiropractors in-house. That's what we are really trying to achieve by bringing those otherwise pretty siloed professions together.
Yeah. And that's what I meant earlier, saying a chiropractic company couldn't do that. You have to be fairly agnostic in your bias, in your preferences, to say, hey, we're all here on the common ground. We're not nitpicking over the differences. We are here because we agree the neck is important. We're all making our best effort to enhance the quality of life of our fellow man by rehabilitating the neck. And those are heavy hitters. I mean, your speaker lineup is stacked. I mean, for those of us that are kind of nerdy into this stuff, like Letty, Trelevin, Dr. Chung's going to be there, Cameron speaking, like there's not a presentation where you'll like wander off out the back of the room, right? Like at a lot of these chiropractic ones, like it's all high level stuff. So I'm very excited, and it'll be really cool to, hear from these folks themselves. What a unique opportunity to have, like you said, a lot of the top minds in this work all together at once. It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
So I'll put the links for all this stuff in the show notes here so you can, go check out the lineup, read the speaker bios, see the itinerary, the dates, all that stuff. The registration links are all there. If you missed your early bird registration, too bad. So sad. They're filling up fast. I know, Orri, you said it's been overwhelming, the response for folks that want to come and attend.
Absolutely, it has. Yeah, we had hundreds of people pre-registering to the conference when we first came out with it, and we'll see where we'll end up, but we have a limited spot, so I'm looking forward to an amazing time in May next year.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate you guys. I've been wanting to do this particular conversation for a long time, so it's been fun, and I know we could go on. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and some of the conversations Cameron and I have offline, and you've had with Cameron and others. So I hope that it at least gets folks acclimated to what's possible here. I know Cameron kind of kept alluding to that, but like what's possible with this technology and where it fits into our world, and how, we can start to advance and collaborate more with data being the common denominator. So we appreciate all that you guys bring to the table, both with the technology, but with the customer support and with the support of our communities. It doesn't go unnoticed. So, big hats off to you and to your team. They've been most welcoming and accommodating to upper cervical chiropractic. And I think that's awesome.
Great. Thanks a lot, John. And on that note, we obviously want to make it accessible to the masses, as many as possible. So, our pricing, we've been working on our pricing model as well, and actually creating a lower barrier to entry. So right now you could actually start at only $129 a month for the range of motion only. And then as you grow and get educated on those other things, you can upgrade to that. But we eliminated the upfront cost, as that, also was a barrier for some. So we really want to work together with the customer to get this in the hands of as many clinicians and patients as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, so check out the pricing model on the website there. And, frankly, you guys can't charge what it's worth or aren't. So we really appreciate you making that barrier to entry accessible for varying levels of clinical experience and needs, because it has something to offer pretty much everybody who's working on the neck. So whether or not you're only interested in the range of motion, you want to go whole hog and get the whole sensory motor and all that, there's something for you there. So check out what NeckCare has to offer. And thanks for bringing that up and mentioning there in closing. Go look at those pricing models. Sometimes folks get a little apprehensive about, God, this sounds like it's expensive or something that's not achievable. It's not true. So go check it out and see what they have to offer. But thanks, guys. Wish you guys all the best in 2025. Looking forward to getting together in May in person in Iceland with some of our smart friends. And it's going to be awesome.
It will. Awesome. Thanks for having me.